This is Music Touching Lives, a podcast from Five Senses Music. I'm conductor Tom Seligman, and in this series I talk to musicians and other artists who do more than just perform or create. They use their passion for what they do to engage others and enable them to get involved. Today I meet someone whose relationship with music is expressed through dance. Choreographer Royston Maldoom is renowned the world over for his ability to get communities dancing, people of every age from right across the social spectrum and from different cultures and backgrounds. In 2004, near the beginning of Simon Rattle's time as chief conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic, he choreographed Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring with over 200 young people from all across Berlin, a project captured in a prize-winning documentary, Rhythm Is It. That film boosted people's awareness of the power of this kind of work. But Royston had been forging a path in community dance for decades already, initially in Scotland and then across the world, as he told me at his home in Berlin.
I came into the community dance field by chance at a time when, although there was activity, there were national youth dance festivals, there were individuals doing great work, some in schools, some in communities around the country. That was the moment when suddenly everybody woke up to the fact that we were part of a movement. So in that sense, I had the chance to be one of the pioneers in that movement.
The impact of the Berlin film was huge, not only on Royston's own career, but on the movement as a whole.
So many people saw it, and many of the requests I've had from other countries, whether it's Japan or Palestine or New Zealand or America, have come because people saw the film. So I think it's had a really amazing effect.
Royston himself discovered dance only in his early 20s. It turned out to be a huge creative release after a childhood full of upheavals.
Yeah, it was complicated. I was a complicated child because of various things that happened within my family, mother dying when I was a little boy, and then a stepmother, and then an absent father until he came home at the end of the war, and a lot of things. And I think I was very distrustful of adults and not a happy child. I can certainly say that, and not a happy teenager. So I think that maybe helped me to empathize with a lot of the kids that I work with who are often troubled or traumatized in some way.
Yeah, and I mean that side, the human side of it, of course, is absolutely fundamental to your work. But I wonder if also the fact that you came fairly late to dance means that you can also you have that ability to see what's inside people, which they perhaps don't yet know is inside themselves, because in fact you had that experience. You only sort of discovered the dancer in yourself in your early 20s.
A lot of people quote me saying in the film, you can change your life in a dance class, which is slightly misinterpreted, because what I'm really saying is you can change your life at any moment. You don't know what the defining thing is that will send your life off on a different trajectory. But certainly the fact that I discovered it so late and that it was so surprising, and there was nothing in my background connected to the arts that suggested I should lean in this direction. It had never really occurred to me. So I learned from that point that, and all the struggle that came afterwards, although I did receive a lot of help from sympathetic people, did make me realize that none of us knows our own potential. I don't know my own potential. Nobody does.
And do you find that working with people who have never worked in dance before, who have perhaps no idea, I mean, some of them are people who have been sort of plonked there by their schools
Forced,
or their social worker, or whoever it is.
Yeah.
Is it fundamentally different, that process of working with those people, compared with people who either are professional dancers or are people who know that that's how they want to express themselves?
The fundamental difference is that I work very often with people that have no desire to do what they've been told they're going to do. When I'm working with professionals, they've already made a life decision. This is what they're committed to. That makes it a lot easier. But in the end, as a choreographer, it is the same thing. You walk in the room, there's your material. Whatever they can do, whether it's 15 pirouettes or just a roll on the floor, you will want more. The more they show you, the more you want, the more you push. So in the end, the social aspect is there, even working with a company. You have to deal with dancers' tantrums, or maybe their overconfidence or underconfidence. You're dealing with human beings. That's all you have to remember is I'm in a room with human beings, and that's the starting point. The other thing is I don't want them coming in and feeling that they're part of some big social experiment. That's the last thing I want. I think a lot of the people I work with are surrounded by social workers or criminal justice organizations, or, they're unhappy at school, maybe having difficulties. I don't want that to continue into my space, into my studio, be it a classroom, be it a hall, be it a theatre, whatever it is. That's not what we're there for. We're there to experiment, to explore, to discover potential, to challenge ourselves and each other. I don't want them to feel that they're guinea pigs in somebody else's experiment. What happens within community arts is simply a reflection of what happens every day in the society. Labeling is big. I try to avoid those labels. I try to ignore them because the labels aren't very interesting. The people aren't interesting as individuals, and they're so different from each other, whether it's in a dance company or within any community. They may share something in common, like a trauma through conflict or some kind of ethnic strife or social deprivation, religious conflict, or they may be coming from other countries and having traveled under very harsh conditions. And it's of course that's big, but it's not who they are. I don't think it should be allowed to define them, because in defining them in that way, we ignore all the many other things that make up their personality, their very fluid personality.
That ability to see beyond the situation people are in to what they might be capable of marks out Royston's work and explains his remarkable success, as for instance in Holloway Prison in North London.
Very often I am accused, and people are quite angry about the fact that I say I don't delve into people's backgrounds. That when I work, I have been criticized for going into prisons, for instance, and not asking questions about the background of the people I work with, which I think is totally irrelevant in the situation we're in. And Holloway is an example of why I approach things the way I do, because in the largest women's prison in England, as was, there is every month something which is called, I think it's called the marketplace, and all the inmates are brought into the central hall, and there are all the stalls set up, which provide them with presumably opportunities to get involved in different organizations. And there are things like help for single mothers in prison, or dealing with drug abuse, or what to do after you leave prison, all these kinds of things that all basically are saying, you are an offender, don't forget it. And
a problem.
And a problem, absolutely. And when I started the project and the first women turned up, very unsure about the whole thing, but I said, why did you decide? And they said, well, we went to this monthly thing, the marketplace, and we saw all these different signs, and then we saw one that said dancers wanted for a production. And we just thought, oh, that has nothing to do with us, with all the rest of it. And we were intrigued and we joined. And I've had that story reflected back so many times to me. It was the fact that it was something that didn't, what's the word?
Well, didn't predefine who they had to be.
Yes, exactly.
Present themselves to you as they
exactly. And people are intrigued by that. They're able, as I always say, encourage them to do, throw off the rucksack of experience and victimhood, and let's just walk in the room emotionally naked, as it were, and let's research and represent ourselves as we wish to. I will find out who you are as we work. You will find out who I am as we work, and that's what matters. And it's not that you are throwing away your experience. You will carry it within your body. You will carry it in the work, as I will. But my background isn't necessarily relevant in the early stage any more than yours is. We're just human beings.
And that can become a powerful part of how participants in a project interact with one another, something Royston was able to explore to the full in a project developed in Northern Ireland around the time of the Berlin Rite of Spring.
I had long had this idea of bringing difficult teenagers, maybe even sometimes slightly violent teenagers, together with very vulnerable children with physical and mental disability. I don't like the terms, but that's what we use. And so I had kept saying I wanted to do this, and people said, oh, you can't do it, it's too dangerous. And a colleague in Northern Ireland who had access to the different educational boards there picked up on the idea and said, okay, let's try it. So over 4 weeks, I worked with a group of teenagers who were excluded from or self-excluding from school for behavioral difficulties, I guess you would call it, and a group of very disabled, both mentally and physically, learning difficulties and physical disability. And I worked with each group separately for 3 weeks, and then I brought them together. And a lot of people were very nervous, and they said, oh, some of these disabled kids look very strange, and it's going to be frightening for the teenagers, and maybe it's too dangerous, and so on. I said, no, maybe you should show some pictures beforehand, and typical, here we go, labeling again. I said, no, they'll be fine. They're human beings, all of them. And then I brought them together in the last week, and it was extraordinary. Because one of the things about little children, often with disabilities, is that they can be very, very instant and open, trusting, and their emotions are on the surface. So when they saw these terrified teenagers come into the room, they immediately went up and said, you're my friend, and hugged them, and so on. And for the teenagers, they suddenly saw there were people who were dealing with difficulties that they never even imagined. They would never normally be around somebody with disability unless it was someone perhaps in their immediate circle or family. It was in the second day that I collected the teenagers to go to the special school, and they said, oh, wait, and they were all making cards and little presents for the kids. And it was a wonderful thing, because for the little kids it was being with these wonderful, for them, big guys and girls, having a chance to integrate in that way and work together. And for the teenagers themselves, they suddenly saw themselves as having a role, that they could be doing something for other people, working with other people. And they became very attached. And in fact, after a couple of weeks, they said, why don't we all go out to a cafe in town and have a day out together? And that was an extraordinary thing for them to do. And it was very successful. We went on to do 5 or 6 of those projects.
And the same goes for people of all ages.
I do bring, or have brought to me, people from very different backgrounds, faith backgrounds in conflict, or maybe from Gaza, or from Bosnia during the conflict, or Lithuania during the revolution against the Soviet occupation. And so I'm often bringing people who have been very much in conflict with each other. And this idea of learning to work with unfamiliar others is very important. And barriers break down very quickly using exercises that are about supporting, lifting, holding, touching. And one of my favorite expressions is prejudice is only skin deep. If you touch the skin, you touch the soul. And it's very difficult after you've touched somebody to have the same kind of feelings about them.
That's the power of physical interaction with others. But what about the relationship between how people present themselves physically to the world and the way they feel about themselves?
That's something that I discovered through experience. It wasn't something that I necessarily expected when I started. But I noticed that through the movement itself, people's personalities, or as we perceive them, seemed to change considerably. That people came out of themselves, that they became more confident. And of course, the more confident we are with ourselves, the more confident we are with other people. We know that. So I realized that you can work through the mind to the body, but equally that you can work through the body to the mind. And that's been borne out throughout my experience. I've seen it again and again.
Nonetheless, that potential to change people's lives comes from the power of the artistic process, something that Royston has always tried to keep at the centre of things.
I think one of the problems that we've faced within the community arts movement is that as we progressed, as artists went out into the community just for various reasons, sometimes economic, sometimes political, they moved outside of mainstream theatres and art spaces into the wider community. They simply worked as artists. And it was that work that really brought it to the attention of other authorities, because they started to notice that when artists went out and did this, that there were changes, there were social changes, there were changes in how people learned, there were changes in how they behaved towards each other, there were social skills were improved, a whole lot of things that were important to public health organizations, educational establishments, and so on. And so they picked it up, which was exciting for us, certainly at the beginning, because we saw that we were being taken seriously, that they were acknowledging the effects that maybe we hadn't expected even on individuals and on communities. And so more funding came in, more interest came. But then I began to feel over the years that very often there were social and educational agendas that were beginning to interfere with our work as artists, that there were certain, one might say, educational social correctness that inhibited our authenticity. And I think that can be a problem. I mean, I think we can learn from social work, we can learn from pedagogues in education, but I think we have to hold very fast to what it is we are at base, which is we are promoters of art for the sake of art. And the joy of promoting art for the sake of art, when handled in a sensitive way, is that it produces very valuable byproducts which can impact education and society generally. And I want us to hold to that, because I think, for me as a choreographer, what keeps me going in the difficult times when I have 100 or 250 kids that have walked into the room and don't want to do it, mostly, don't want to be there, what keeps me going in the difficult moments is my excitement and my passion. And that's why I choose music that I love, and that's why I choose themes that I'm interested in, and that's why I work with styles that interest me, because the first thing is whoever is leading the project has to be passionate and has to be excited, otherwise you've no chance.
You've talked about choosing the music that you love and that you're passionate about, and you've certainly choreographed a phenomenal range of extremely ambitious music: Bartok, Gorecki, John Adams, James Macmillan. You've done a version of Carmina Burana, and that's just to speak of some of the big classical works. You've got a great confidence in Western classical music, which you've often taken into perhaps very unlikely settings, maybe with some resistance?
Not resistance from participants, hardly ever, because perhaps the way I introduce it helps, but resistance from social commentators, journalists, experts. You know, when I go to KwaZulu and decide to do Carmina Burana, and there's a big hoo-ha, not from the kids, they loved it, they loved the music, it's very exciting music. You know, I was told, this is colonialism at its worst, and so on and so on and so on. And then I tell often the story after the first performance when a Zulu woman just came up and said, with tears in her eyes, and said, "How did you know what it's like to be black in South Africa?" And I wasn't doing a piece about being black in South Africa. I was doing a piece about the conflict between fate and love, and questioning how much of our life is fate that we can't resist, and how much can we change our fate through love. And this is relevant in every single society to every single person. And I use, certainly initially, so for instance, when I went to Ethiopia, where I was involved for 5 years working with street kids who became professionals later on, I started with music that I knew and I loved, because I felt I shouldn't go in at an early stage and start messing around with their culture. I would say, I'm bringing something that I know, which I think and hope you might enjoy. It's not better than what you know, it's just different. And put the skills that I think I have in their hands and hope that they will move forward and adapt or use it in a different way. And that certainly happened in Ethiopia, where now the street kids that I worked with have the only major contemporary dance company in Ethiopia, which is Contemporary Ethio Dance, and combines the two as they seem fit, and deals mostly with Ethiopian themes, Ethiopian music very often, uses Ethiopian traditional forms along with quite spectacular contemporary dance forms. So I think I can leave it to them. But I think, Credo Mutwa, who was a famous African Sangoma, what in the West we enlightened enough to call witch doctors, but a very, very wise man who had the whole history of the Shona nation in the palm of his hand. And when I was talking to him, I asked him about this very thing and the criticism I get. And he said, "Royston, the thing that is of most value in any culture is that we can share with other cultures." So that was good enough for me.
Sometimes the impulse to work with a particular piece of music comes from outside, as was the case with a big project with the London Symphony Orchestra, also involving hundreds of children, and based on the music of the Russian composer Dmitri Shostakovich.
The London Symphony Orchestra were going to have a season of Shostakovich, and they sent me several of his symphonies to listen to. And I was really completely unfamiliar with Shostakovich music, or I'd never noted it ever. And so I listened to 3 or 4, and they were all, as always when I have these pieces of music, seemed impossible. But I liked the beginning of the Shostakovich, and I thought, well, it's often...
Number 10.
Yes, number 10. Can I get the beginning? If I can get the beginning, then I'm underway. And so that's how I decided to do it. And the same with many of the pieces that I've done. Sometimes I do make a choice because I hear a piece of music and it's so challenging and sounds so impossible that I feel I have to try and do it. And also, I like music that's complex because I don't want the participants and the young people or anybody to be simply relying forever on a beat, just on a simple rhythm. I like complex rhythms. I like harmonic structures. I like differences in dynamic. I like the fact that, for instance, in Stravinsky, you may suddenly have the full orchestra blaring out, so you've brought 250 people on stage, and then without warning, you have a simple oboe, and you've got all those people there, and how do you deal with that? A total change of dynamic, when you wish you just had one person on the stage, which would be much simpler. So I love all that, and I love taking the participants through that journey, so they hear music in a much more complete kind of way. One of my downsides, which might be an upside in a way in my work, is that I can't plan. I tend to be sent the music, or I hear a piece of music and think, that's impossible, I have to do it. And mostly it is music that I think is just beyond me, just impossible. And, I listen to it, and normally it scares me so much, I just put it away in a drawer until I arrive in the studio. I'm lucky in that I've learned to work intuitively, because that's probably the most important thing. You may know the music, but you walk into the room, you don't know the people, you don't know who's there. It could be any mixture of people. The dynamics could be anything. It could be a rainy day, it could be a sunny day, it could be a small space, it could be a big space. So many things. You have to work in the moment. You have to have, it helps when you have a history, it helps when you have a full toolbox. But very often you reach into the toolbox and nothing does the job, so you just have to. I just walk in the room and start, and something will happen. If I can get the beginning, then from there I can just drift along, sometimes with nothing in my mind at all. And interesting for me, when I later look back on a project, there are whole sections I can't remember doing. I don't actually remember doing them, or I don't know where they came from. I don't know why I did that. I do a bit and then I go, well, there's 100 kids facing me and they want to do something else now, so I just do something, anything that comes in my mind. And then it seems to just find, the story begins to tell itself to me.
In 2007, you were awarded what I think is a wonderful title, Optimist of the Year.
Absolutely.
By the Hamburg-based Optimists Club.
Yes.
So here's a naive question to finish with. Can you imagine a world in which every child, well, within reason, every child had the chance not only to be obviously well-nourished, have a basic education, but also had the chance to dance, to sing?
Well, the first thing to say is that every kid basically dances and sings. I mean, in the most awful conditions, when you see the new work coming out of the townships in South Africa, or when you look at any country that's in difficulty, kids dance, they sing. And we don't exploit that enough, I think. Yeah, it's really distressing sometimes. It's hard to stay optimistic. I know we have to just keep fighting and fight our corner and do what we can. And when I'm, watching TV or listening to speeches and I listen to politicians saying, oh, this problem with refugees and this problem with this and this problem with that, and what's the answer? And I want to scream at the television, I know the answer. We know the answer. Just listen. And it's cheap. It's a lot cheaper than weapons and so on. But we're fighting, political interests and national interests, and it's a bad time in many ways in the world. Actually, it's a very bad time, I think. But we have to keep the hope alive, and the amount that it costs or would cost to provide children the opportunities to sing more, to develop their interest in music, to play instruments, to dance, to act, to paint. When we know the benefits, it's not just me, the research is there. If anyone wants to look it up, if any politician wants to take the time to look at the research, the evidence is there and the answers are there. They may not be the total answer, but there are a lot of the answer. Every company that I know has an educational community program. Every artist freelance I meet is working not just professionally, but working in the community as well, or in schools. So it's growing, and maybe we will reach at some point a tipping point, and until then we just have to keep going.
You've been listening to Music Touching Lives, a podcast from Five Senses Music with me, Tom Seligman, and my guest today, Royston Maldoom. To find out more, please visit us at fivesensesmusic.org. And if you enjoyed the podcast, do subscribe to the series and share it with all your friends and colleagues to help us reach as many listeners as we can. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us again soon.